Hey everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to be going a little bit more in detail with the Selenium package, and we're going to be introducing a couple new Python features that aren't inherent. They're not part of Selenium, they're just Python in general, that we haven't really done that much with. And I was planning on rolling some of these more advanced Selenium tactics into the Pandas series as an example of some more advanced data gathering. But the more I got into it, I realized that they probably needed at least one, maybe a couple videos outside of that before we got there, just to really kind of bring it all together and get everyone on the same page. Because I didn't want to introduce any new material without taking the time to explain it and walk through it, and risk somebody not understanding and being kind of left behind or not realizing what the code was doing or why. Because they can lead to some issues down the road if you're not overly familiar with what's happening. So today we're going to be looking at a similar workflow to what we had before in getting the advanced stats for the season. But we're going to be looking at specifically looping through and getting the stats from multiple seasons in one go. Instead of having to rewrite and run it for one season and for another, I'm going to be showing you how to incorporate a for loop within Python, as well as some F strings in order to automate that process and loop through each season independently with just running it one time, which is very nifty and can cut down a lot of time. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so as you can see, we're not starting with a blank notebook today, but this hopefully looks familiar to you because this is the code we ran through previously on our advanced or on our Selenium part 2 tutorial. What this is going to be showing is, we bring up our web driver, we go to our advanced stats page, we select our element, the page number that we're on, we put it on all, we get the source information, we pull out the headers, we get the rows, and we drop it out to Excel, right? So first off, one important thing to note is to make sure, because this URL is pretty generic, right? It doesn't tell us what season we're in, it doesn't tell us anything like that. So just as a quick test, we're going to go to that URL right here, and you're going to notice some things. First off, it's defaulting us to playoffs, right? And we're wanting the whole season, but this was the active home page, so it's going to be showing us the most up-to-date information, and now we're in playoffs. The playoffs are the most relevant. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means we need to dig a little bit deeper. So if we look up here at our address bar, we have exactly what we put in. Now notice, if we click the little X and take off the playoffs modifier and take us back to the regular season, you'll notice our URL got a lot longer. Now I know that's probably little, so we're going to bring it over here and take a look at it. So now our URL, so we still have stats.nba.com/player/advanced. Still have the question mark, sort equals games played, at directory equals -1. So that's the generic stuff that we start with. From there, we're going to have ampersand season equals 2019-20, ampersand season type equals regular, and the percentage sign 20 season. So what that's telling us is we're getting our advanced stats, the regular season stats from the 2019-2020 season. So that's all dictated by the URL. Even though it's a filter we can put on here, it's still going to be dictated by the URL. So in order to go through multiple seasons, we now have something in the URL we can change. And changing things in the URL is not terribly difficult, but we are going to have to learn something a little new. We're going to have to go over some F strings, okay? And F strings, I know we have not gone over before, so we're going to give us a couple extra cells here, and we're going to go through it real quick. So, first things first, what is an F string? So a normal string, we have plenty of them, is just defining some text. Not a variable, but actual text. An F string is going to allow us to define text and then drop a variable in that text somewhere. So if we wanted to print my name is, and then put your name, that's the easy way, would be to hard code it, right? Print my name is Nick. Okay, but anytime the name changes, you have to come in and change this code anytime where that occurs. So if you had this occurring several times in the code, you'd have to go change it every time. That's not very efficient. We don't like that. We like to only do things one time, not several times. So you might think, well, what if we define a variable as name and define it as Nick? Then we can just do print my name is, and then we can do a plus, and we can do name. And there we go. Okay, but what if you have multiple names that you need to loop through? And plus, that's kind of a pain to write out like that, having to end your string and then a plus and then append on your variable, and you have to make sure you have your space there, otherwise it's not going to be there. That's not ideal either. So what an f string is implemented in Python 3. So if you're in Python 2.7 still, you can do it. It's just going to be not quite as clean. So the old way of doing it would have been to, after your string is closed, so after these parentheses are closed off, just a string function is string.format, and then you can put that your variable there, and then you would have an empty bracket inside, and you'd run that, and then the string is smart enough to realize the combination of those curly brackets and the dot format to know to plop the name variable inside those brackets, right? So that works. That's a lot better, but it's still kind of, for lack of a better word, ugly. I mean, it's gross to type like that. It's not a very clean function. So an f string, if we put an f in front of the quotation mark there, kind of like how I was doing R for a raw string, that was to ignore these escape characters, so I didn't have to double type them to break the escape. That's just me being lazy, to be totally honest. But for an f string, we still do the curly brackets. We just keep it all as part of the string, and then we plop the variable inside, and it does the same thing. So no more dot formats. It's much cleaner. It keeps it's much easier to read. The readability is much better. Because if this was a longer string or something harder to read, like a URL, and you're plopping those brackets inside, one, it can be hard to find the brackets if you have other characters like that included in the string. And two, then you have to go back, okay, the first one, the first variable, second one, the second variable. It's just a pain. But with an f string, you have the variable right there in the string. There's no bouncing around to figure out what it is. You read it straight through, and as long as the variable name makes sense, you can pretty much understand it without looking anywhere else. That's an f string. Now to combine that with a for loop, let's iterate over a list. I mean, we'll make it relevant. NBA seasons equals a list, and we'll do 2019-20. 2018-19, 2017-18. All right. So we have a list. Let's say we're interested in those 3 seasons. And we want to look at each season. So we can do for season and NBA seasons. Print. Gotta be in a string. The season in question is season. And then, see now if we just do that, we're just gonna get that. It's gonna loop through 3 times because we're doing it for each season, but we're not including the season variable because we forgot to make it an f string. Making it an f string is what tells Python that those brackets, there's a variable inside. So run it again, and now 2019-20, 2018-19, 2017-18. Holy smokes, that's great. Now, if you are thinking ahead, you'll see that we can go ahead and incorporate that into this right here. So we have our URL that we're going to. If we come back and put our f string and season there, we're going to print the URL, and each one is going to have the new season incorporated where it should be in that string. So let's, as an example, click on one, 2019-20. Perfect. Let's click on this one. Should take us 2018-19. Perfect. Click on this one. Take us 2017-18. Perfect. There we go. We're done, right? Well, not quite. So there's one more thing that we need to take into consideration here. So one of the nice things about working in Jupyter Notebooks is you take it cell by cell by cell, and it won't run the next cell until the previous one is finished. So it allows us to kind of slow things down artificially. As an example, let's see, we have this set to advanced stats example 1. Perfect. So if I run through here one at a time, it's going to take us through slowly, and we're not going to have any problems. And then you're going to see here we have our old advanced stats example from the last time we ran this, and you're going to get advanced stats example 1 now, right? So this is our updated advanced stats example, and you can see we're on the playoff one again, because that's what that URL takes us to. So the most games played we have is 5 right now. So going slowly like that, there's no problems. And if any of you have been experimenting on your own with any of this code, you've probably come across this already. If I go ahead and put this select statement, remember, and that's where I'm selecting the drop-down menu where the number of pages are. If I put that up here, let's go ahead and close these and just start over. I'm going to get an error on this cell, because it's going to try to run that select statement before it exists on the web page to pick. And you can see right here, unable to locate element, and we scroll up to see where it is, and sure enough, it's our select statement. So what's happening there is, as soon as the driver.getURL reads that it's done, it moves on to the select statement. However, I'm sure you guys have loaded a web page before where up in the top on the little tab, it stops spinning and tells you it's done, but all the material is not loaded on the page. It's that in-between period that's going to give us trouble, because the driver thinks the page is there, but all of the source material is not quite loaded to be able to pick from. So we need to put in some way to pause before we move forward with selections, because in a more advanced setting, you're not going to be going through running cell by cell on Jupyter Notebooks. You're going to have this in a separate standalone file that you can just run, and it does it. You don't have to come in here and slow it down artificially. You can bake it into the code. So to do that, we have some more import statements down here. So we already have used these, and we've already used these, but we have a couple new ones here in the middle. We have WebDriver wait, expected conditions, and by with a capital B. So these are pretty self-explanatory. WebDriver wait is going to tell the WebDriver to wait, or we're going to define some expected conditions, and we're going to tell the WebDriver to wait until those expected conditions have been met. Okay, and then by is just going to be a function of expected conditions. We're going to tell it define the expected conditions by the XPath. So a couple more things we're going to put in this import cell here is just going to be our NBA seasons list, because we're actually going to go through and do it here. And we're just going to copy this one from up here to save some time, because we're just going to go through 3 seasons just to show how it works. And then I like to define a timeout variable as a number of seconds to wait or until the expected conditions are met. So we shouldn't have to do any pip installs if we've been following along, because we already have Selenium and Beautiful Soup and Pandas installed. Again, you don't need to do a pip install for all of these. You just need to do a pip install from Selenium. And then all of this comes included. This is just keeping our code a little bit cleaner, so I don't have to type out, selenium.webdriver.sport.ui.select every time I want to use select. So just a refresher there to remind you of what that's for. And now we can go ahead and tell our code what the WebDriver is. It's going to be Firefox. And then we can go ahead. We need to define a for loop to loop through the seasons, just like we did with our strings here. 4 season NBA seasons. We're going to loop through these URLs. An important thing to note is that anything that's dependent on that URL all needs to be inside of the for loop, including the assigning of the URL variable. Because if you define the URL variable first, it's going to be defined without the season variable inside of it. So up here where we defined the URL up with a driver, and we got the URL, we're not going to do that. The driver can be outside of the for loop because we only need to spin up one driver instance. We don't need multiple Firefox windows for it. We just need to take that window and go to a different URL. So, for season and NBA seasons. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is define the URL. So we're going to come up here, and we're just going to, again, copy and paste this, but with the F string, because we already know that's what we want. We already checked it. It took us to the right web pages, and we already have the season variable baked in. Okay. So now we're going to, anything included in the for loop, we're going to loop through the whole thing for one season and come back up and then loop through it again. So we have the URL. Then we need to get that URL. We need to actually go there. And then we're going to need to start doing some new things. So we're going to do element present, and that's just the name of the variable I'm defining for my expecting conditions, because it makes sense to me because we're waiting until this element is present. So that's just a way to increase the readability. And we're going to use the expecting conditions module. And from within that, we're going to do presence of element located by XPath. And then we're going to put the XPath in, which again, we can just copy and paste from up here because it's the same XPath that we used before. Okay. We have our XPath in, and our parentheses are closed. So what this is doing is defining a variable element present. Element present is defining expecting conditions where presence of element is located. How are we locating it by XPath? What are we locating this XPath? So what that's doing is saying the presence of this, so the existence of this element. So the error we hit before where it said we couldn't find that element to select, we're saying here is basically going to be, a true false. Is this element present? Yes or no? And then next, we're going to define a WebDriver wait. And we need to point it at the driver again. That's the variable where's my mouse? There it is. That's the variable we defined. If you're using a different variable to define your WebDriver, then you'll put that here because you want to point your wait function to the driver. And then you want to point it to the time it's willing to wait, 25 seconds, until element present. So we're basically saying it's willing to wait 25 seconds for this element to be present. And if we don't have the element in 25 seconds, then it's going to give us a timeout error and say that we've timed out. It couldn't find it in 25 seconds. So that's, I use 25. I've had a few issues before depending on the size of the page I'm loading, and your internet speed obviously too. I've had some issues with less than 25 seconds. 25 has seemed to be the sweet spot for me on what works. But I've got pretty quick internet. If you find yourself with slower internet, it's taking longer, you're timing out, you can bump that up as high as you need to. This is just what's worked for me. So what we're doing here is telling the WebDriver to stop. Don't carry out any more functions until this element is present or you've timed out at 25 seconds. So now we can comfortably move forward with our select statement because we don't have to worry about timing out. We don't have to worry about any error messages that it can't find it. And now we can just start copying down here because we're going to do the same exact thing as we did before. We need to find that element. We need to select all from the dropdown to get all of the players. We need to still get the driver source, put it through the beautiful soup, pull the table out, get the headers, strip out so we just have the text for the headers. All of this needs to be done still. We just need to do it for every season. The nice thing about that is once we've built in the wait functions and the URL changes for the season, we don't really have to change anything else until we save the file, and then we just want to make sure that we're saving the file based on the season so we can tell them apart in the file names, right? So we can just, make sure you keep your indentation correct. Everything that you want to loop season by season needs to be indented from the for loop. So this is everything from all of our previous cells just kind of rolled into one. And then we're going to do the same thing with, let's see, and again, since I'm taking the raw string off, I need to go through and double up these forward slashes so that it doesn't think it's an escape character and it actually goes to that file location. And all we're going to do here is change the output to include that season moniker with the F string. So instead I'll now get a file called advanced stats example 2019-20, advanced stats example 2018-19, etc. So now let's go ahead and reset everything just to be safe so we don't have any overlapping variables. And let's run through this and see how it goes. Alright, and let's go ahead and pull this up, and we should start to see some new file. Yep, advanced stats 2019-20, advanced stats 2018-19, and advanced stats 2017-18, hopefully. There we go. Alright, so we got all our files out, and we've got the file finished running there. So now we can see, and just to be safe, we have 73, 73, 74. So we do have a difference in file size, so you can be fairly confident that they are different. We're going to go ahead and open up 2019, 20, 2017, 18 to make sure. Or we'll do 2018, 19 since it was the same file size actually. That's the questionable moment. We'll zoom in on this one a little bit. We're going to be looking at player and age because the ages are probably different. Okay. Why don't we sort them both by player name? Get the same ones up top. So Aaron Gordon, 23, 24. Aaron Holiday, 22, 23. All right. I feel pretty confident that this is correct since these are 1 year apart. Their ages are a year advanced, even though it's the same file size. I've double checked. I can now feel confident that my code worked and that they are in fact different and relevant to the right season. So that's how you're going to be able to use f-strings in order to manipulate your URLs when relevant, when possible. It's not always going to be possible. Like we've already experienced when we wanted to pull up the full data set for, the NBA stats, we had to do it using Selenium to navigate through and change this from 1 to all. That was not something we could do in the URL, but it is certainly something that we can done with Selenium. And the complete opposite, doing the 2017-18, the season, we found that this is reflected in the URL. So that's something we can do a lot easier than this. So I'd encourage you, is you go out and you try and your hand at data scraping for your own personal needs. I usually try to find something in the URL that I can change first and get as much done in the URL as possible, because it's a lot easier to just loop through a variable, changing the URL however you want it, than it is to navigate every single page and click everything. Because while we could very well come through in Selenium and, navigate to this menu and select the season we want here, that's all fine and dandy and it works, but it's more complex than just changing the string in the URL. String manipulation is pretty easy. So anyways, that's all I have for this one, guys. We'll have another one coming up soon on how to navigate through some of those more complex filters and menus. I just wanted to throw this in as an example, because this is something that, the more data, the better, especially when you're looking at more big picture machine learning. The goal is to generalize, not to get too specific. So if you can have data over 4 or 5 years instead of just one season or half a season, you're going to theoretically have a better predictive model for the more general circumstances. So yeah, that's all we've got here. If you are a fan, feel free to give me a like down below. If there's something else you would like to see done, let me know down in the comments. That's 100% where this video came from. So you can definitely get certain materials shown in a more in-depth manner if you would like. You just gotta let me know. And I will see you guys in the next one.